There's so much going on day 11 of the Jonathan Majors trial, and we're going to get to it. We have exhibits being made publicly available because Judge Gaffey lifted an order that sealed them previously. We have the prosecution resting their case. We have the defense calling key witnesses such as an ER expert witness, Detective Mejia, who handled the iCard for Grace Jabbari, and more. And I'm going to roll us through the whole day. But in case you don't have time and you only want to know what People magazine thinks you need to know about all the stuff happening today, yesterday, everything since Friday, let's take a look. And you can see at the bottom there, December 13th, 4:02 p.m. This is the first tweet from Emily Palmer since the 11th. As Jonathan Majors' assault trial continues, People obtained past text messages between the actor and his accuser, Grace Jabbari. In the texts, which are in evidence, Majors calls himself a monster and a horrible man. Read those messages here. Now we have a whole new article on December 13th about the same text messages that they already published on, just because there's now screenshot images available to the public. Cool. But besides that, I'm not going to be focusing that much on critiquing the media coverage today. That one speaks for itself, but all this other information that's coming out, from the chase video to the Coretta Scott King recording to some of the photos, the one body cam footage. We also had the 911 call released earlier and separately this morning by Laura Italiano from Insider. There was actually a big win for the media in this case. If you remember, in the first day of trial, there was an attorney that showed up on behalf of the press advocating for transparency in this case, and the judge had decided, against the argument made by that attorney, that he was going to keep most of the evidence filed under lock and seal on this case. But today, he lifted that sealing order, and that's why some of this stuff is being published now by TMZ, Insider, Daily Beast. Everyone's kind of all over it. Even though I might mention the chase video and the body cam video, as well as the Coretta Scott King recording, I have two separate videos. One covers the Coretta Scott King recording, and the other covers the chase and body cam video. You can check those out if you want to check those things out in full. But I'm going to keep this a nice, stacked, concise recap of day 11 inside the courthouse. And now let's run through day 11 of the court. We're going to go in order of how things happened in the courtroom so we can feel like we were there. And I'm going to leave this headline here while I'm not showing anything else that needs to be shown, because I had to read it twice because I was shocked. It actually said damning Grace Jabbari videos and not damning Jonathan Majors videos. So shout out to them for that. So today we had Danny and Jimmy in court again, so shout out to them. Victoria B was reporting all day on Twitter as well. And spoiler alert, obviously the defense is going to rest their case by the end of the day today. And from both Jimmy and Danny, there's an optimism that with closing arguments taking place tomorrow, that deliberations will be able to start tomorrow, and they're feeling optimistic that a verdict could come back tomorrow. So if you have an opinion on what you think, and obviously juries can move in their own ways, right? But if you have an opinion on what that verdict is going to be, share it. Before court starts this morning, there was the 911 call released by Insider, so the public got to hear it. Part of it is played again today in court, and it was played in full yesterday on day 10. So if you haven't heard it, you can go and hear it. I'll put a link in the description. But just to sum it up, Jonathan Majors says he's calling for maybe an attempted unaliving of self. Thanks, Mama Wanna God, for subscribing. You can hear him telling the 911 dispatcher, "I don't know, but she's unconscious, and she's naked from the bottom down. She has a sweatshirt on. She's my ex-partner. We broke up. I came back. She sent me text messages insinuating as much." Because remember, that last text message was, "There's no note, just wanted to let you know what happened." He describes how the door was locked and, he got in after the handyman opened it and found her in the closet. "Do you know what she did or what she took, or you don't know?" And he said, "No, I don't know," Majors said. The dispatcher ends up connecting Jonathan Majors over to EMS. He starts asking them, "What should I do? What should I do?" And it's my read that he does sound distressed. He stays on the phone this whole time. They ask, "Do you know if she had fallen or hit her head?" And he's like, "No, I think I see a cut behind her ear." And then they ask, "Does she have a mental condition or history?" And he starts to say, "I would say maybe so. She has a history of," and can't hear it, it's inaudible. It sounds like he might have said like one word or stopped because something happened. He does start to describe a few moments after that he believes it was an attempted unaliving of self because of text messages that she sent, and describes the text message that there's no note, just letting you know what happened. That's towards the very end of this call. Again, it was about 4.5 minutes long. And you can actually hear the police officers arriving and speaking to Jonathan Majors on the audio of this call. And that matches what Danny had said that she saw on the body cam footage. Now, back to the courtroom. So, just wanted you to know that context because it comes back into play today. Court starts a little bit late because 2 jurors were late to arrive, and there's a problem with juror number 2. Danny thinks they might have to switch her out for one of the alternates. And then the DV expert that closed out the day yesterday gets back on the stand, and the defense has no more questions for them, so they just, the witness is dismissed. So they let that witness go, and the prosecution rests their case. So prosecution's done. At this point, the defense is moving for a dismissal, saying, there's not enough evidence, judge, you should drop this. And that's not unusual. They'll try this in all the cases. But I want to read it because there are some interesting pull quotes from this part of the court. As Zuckerman argues for this, he heavily cites the testimonies of Jabbari and Sarwar, the driver. He's arguing that those testimonies do not show that Majors had the legal requisite intent to harass, annoy, threaten, or alarm Jabbari. Because in Jabbari's own testimony last week, she said that Majors was trying to keep her out of his way and trying to make me stay in the car during the alleged assault. And then Zuckerman also references Sarwar's quotes, saying that when Majors opened the car door trying to get rid of Jabbari, that Majors was saying, "Leave me alone, I want to go, I have to go," and was not doing anything. She, the girl, Jabbari, was doing everything. So that was the core reasoning underlying the motion to dismiss. And then prosecutors Michael Perez and Kelly Galloway object, of course, it's normal, and saying that there is enough evidence, photos, videos, testimony to prove Majors' alleged assault. AD Perez argues that traffic cam and security video footage, which we've seen today, you can watch my video on that the traffic cam and security video footage shows Majors repeatedly pushing Jabbari back into the vehicle with all of his force, and that there is intention on his face. The force Majors was using speaks for his actions, Perez said. Judge Gaffey ruled that there's sufficient and competent evidence and that it's clear Majors and Jabbari were involved in an altercation where Jabbari has indicated she suffered substantial pain. So, not going to throw out the case, and order of dismissal is denied. So now the defense begins their case in chief. And NYPD detective Ronnie Mejia is the witness being called. And if you are familiar with the motion to dismiss and the iCard and the confusing information about the iCard and arrest for Grace Jabbari, Detective Mejia was the one that found probable cause to arrest Grace Jabbari and had her ultimately appear for a desk appearance ticket. Now, in this snippet here, there is a bit that seems pretty important. Victoria notes that this is from a prosecution document in September, where they state that on August 21st, 2023, defense counsel requested that the people produce an iCard that was issued for Mr. Jabbari by Detective Mejia of the 10th Precinct. That was around the time that Priya Chaudhry was saying that the DA told Mejia not to make the arrest. The DA denies doing that, but now we're going to hear from this person. They're on the stand at this point in time on day 11. So we find out some basic information. He's been part of the NYPD since 2010. Now, the way that they meet is Priya Chaudhry walks into the police station and, she's there in person and she has a laptop and she pulls Jonathan Majors up on FaceTime. So they get to talk a little bit about, investigating Jabbari for what happened on March 25th. It was a short direct examination. And then on cross, the ADA tried to, poke some holes back at Mejia by getting him to say that it wasn't typical for a defense lawyer to come in and file a domestic incident report with the client on FaceTime. However, Jonathan Majors appeared in person himself a few days after to confirm everything in the report and do the complaint in person. Thanks, Sardis. So now the importance of Detective Mejia getting on the stand is there was a very limited scope of what the defense could try to ask and try to probe into that arrest, that desk appearance ticket where Grace Jabbari had to voluntarily appear for her arrest. And by having him on the stand and knowing that Majors was able to file a complaint of any sort involving Grace Jabbari about March 25th is a way to get that image out there that someone found probable cause to be investigating and to issue an iCard. So even though it was short, it introduced that bit of information in its own way because it wasn't something that Priya Chaudhry was able to get Grace Jabbari to indulge during cross-examination. So then the defense calls their second witness, and this is Dr. Tammy Weiner, and she's an emergency medical attending physician and she's here as an expert medical witness. That means she's here to discuss her expertise as it would relate to the injuries that Grace Jabbari sustained on March 25th. And the goal of the defense in calling her is to point out inconsistencies with how the prosecution and Grace Jabbari on testimony claim that she got these injuries, if the mechanism of the claim would be consistent with the type of injuries shown. Now remember, the injuries that are still remaining at the center of this case, because the strangulation charge was dropped, are that right middle finger and then the laceration behind the right ear, so both on the right side of the body. And there are some other pictures out there, but here's one of the finger and here's one of the cut behind the ear. Now this is at the top, it says Grace Jabbari, and I don't think her family members would have Jabbari in the name there. I'm assuming this might be pictures she sent to Holly, because we know that she had texted pictures of her injuries to Holly at some point. So this is probably something that Holly Blakey submitted. So they give us some background on Dr. Tammy Weiner. She's an ER doctor in Danbury, Connecticut. She works in a level 2 trauma center at the hospital, and level 2 is described as a very high level of care. And as expected, there were a bunch of objections issued and sustained during this part, both direct and I think some on cross as well. Priya Chaudhry's leading the questioning on direct, and the point is to drill down on the finger injury, the ear injury, possible causes, and most importantly, the prosecution is alleging that that finger injury occurred from like a pulling, twisting motion of the finger. So they're going to have Dr. Tammy Weiner dive into the nitty-gritty of how twist and pull injuries work. First, they dive into the earlobe, the ear laceration, and we get Dr. Tammy testifying, "I don't see evidence of a strong blow to the earlobe here because I'd expect to see a significant amount of bruising or swelling, and I don't see that." So if you look in that picture over there on the bottom, that's not really the best one. Let me pull up this other one. So now the jury is being shown one of these photographs of behind the ear. I'm not sure exactly which one, but defense attorney Priya asks, is this photo consistent with a sharp blow to the head? Because that's how the prosecution is alleging it, that we heard Jabbari testify that she remembers Jonathan Majors striking her in the right ear, and that's the cause of injury. That's what the prosecution is alleging. So asking if it's consistent with a sharp blow to the head, no, Dr. Tammy says. And then Priya Chaudhry asks what was reviewed in her preparation for her expert testimony today. And Dr. Tammy says she reviewed Grace Jabbari's medical records from Bellevue, as well as videos from when she and Majors left the car. She also said she reviewed pieces of Jabbari's testimony, which expert witnesses can do, including her account of the car incident and injuries. So if you heard me ask yesterday about whether the DV expert may have heard the police officer's testimony earlier in the day saying that Grace Jabbari told them Majors grabbed her throat, and she gives the one example of not all physical abuse is punching. It can also be choking, and that was like the one example she gave. My brain was wondering that since she's an expert witness, maybe she was sitting in the court and heard that that was alleged and just wanted to put it in the jury's ear that choking could be physical abuse, which it is. But that's not even being alleged in this case at all. But back to Dr. Tammy, Chaudhry asks if she's ever seen a patient immediately after breaking a finger. Yes. And she also said that she's seen patients hours after a break. Then the doctor tells the court about how if a fractured area is touched, it's going to be painful. She says that providers also look for nonverbal cues like grimacing. So this is while she's looking at, the video footage and the other evidence. So all of that footage where we see Grace Jabbari on the sidewalk, we see some of her face turning while she's talking to Chloe. We see her using her hands kind of without flinching or anything like that while she's tying her hair back. Video surveillance of her at the club moving the credit card and wallet in and out of her purse, grabbing the limes, grabbing the shots. This is the video footage that this expert witness was watching to prepare for this testimony and give her expert opinion that normally when a fractured area is touched, it's going to be painful, so people should be exhibiting signs and a reaction to that pain. So Dr. Tammy goes on to say explicitly that even if it was your dominant hand, you'd avoid using it for actions you'd normally use your dominant hand for, the woman said. And I've had a broken finger. It was not my dominant hand, but I still made sure I carried it out of the way so I didn't bump anything with it. And Priya Chaudhry's trying to elicit testimony, asking questions about if there was this injury, we're seeing this injury here, it's not consistent with the idea of twisting and pulling, which is what they're alleging Jonathan Majors did to Grace Jabbari's finger. But a whole bunch of questions were objected to, and the objections were sustained. And then the doctor's shown a picture of Jabbari's hand, and she says, I do not see any evidence of any type of twisting injury to the hand or other fingers. And she said she's treated patients whose fingers have been twisted and suffered crush injuries to know the difference. They go to lunch for the hour and 15 minutes, and then court resumes. Priya asks, is it medically possible for the laceration we see in that photo to be caused by a human hand? The judge interjects to ask, do you mean any part of the human hand? Priya answers yes. And so the judge asks the doctor whether she could answer with a degree of medical certainty. And then the judge tells Priya, I think you should ask another question. I don't think the answer will be to a degree of medical certainty. So I don't think they get an answer on that. And I haven't really seen people discuss how cross went, but it must have been short because it moved right along into the third witness based on the timestamps. And just to summarize, the whole point of that expert witness being called was to suggest that Grace Jabbari's finger was not injured in the Lucy's group photos yet at the club, and that her injury couldn't have possibly been caused by what they're saying it was caused by. So the twisting or squeezing of the hand. And then the third and final witness that the defense calls is Elan, I don't know, Ruspoli. You can read me in the comments, I don't know. Apparently people are familiar with who he is. He's a talent agent at WME, that's William Morris Endeavor, and he has been Jonathan Majors' talent agent since 2017 while Jonathan Majors was still at Yale. So we get a timestamp testimony from this guy that's important. He says that at 10:45 Eastern on March 25th, Jonathan called him in a panic. He says that Jonathan Majors sounded beyond concerned, distraught, and worried. He testified and then demonstrated how Jonathan banged on the door at least 70 to 80 times before calling 911 at 11:12 a.m. But 70 to 80 times he's banging. I mean, that could be pretty quick, I guess. But we're getting testimony from him of 10:45, Jonathan Majors is making a call, already distraught and worried, and saying that the 911 call was made at 11:12 a.m. But where does that Grace Jabbari text message to Holly fit? Because to me, it sounds like while Jonathan Majors is banging on the door, she's still conscious and sending this text. And while Ruspoli was testifying about these knock on the door attempts, he starts banging on the witness stand loudly to get the jury to understand what it sounded like to him through the phone. We know the police arrive, according to Officer Swain's testimony, and also now the fact that we have a 4.5-minute 911 call that the police arrive in before the call duration ends. But we have Grace Jabbari texting Holly up until 11:07 Eastern. If this 911 call was made at 11:12 and it was 4.5 minutes long, maybe it was made towards the end of 11:12. It was almost 11:13. So if it was made at 11:13 and responders arrive in less than 4 minutes and it takes them a minute to get up those 3 flights of stairs in the penthouse, because it was 3 flights of stairs they had to go up. That means Grace Jabbari sent this text message at 11:07 a.m. and then was unconscious at 11:20. And all of this whole trial, those timestamps right there do not match with the story Grace Jabbari told and the story that the prosecution wants to charge Jonathan Majors and convict Jonathan Majors on. If you've got other math, let me know how it works out. So while Ruspoli's on the stand, they replay some of this 911 call. Ruspoli testifies that the actor sounds near the same as he did in the 911 call as when he was calling him that morning. And then the defense rests their case. So tomorrow we're going to have closing arguments. The prosecution will go first, then the defense will go, and the prosecution has a chance to come back up and make an additional closing statement. Thanks, Ace Boogie. And then the jury will start deliberating. So unless these closing arguments are like War and Peace, 800 pages long, probably going to get to deliberations tomorrow and we could see a verdict tomorrow. So, and remember that the things that are said in closing arguments are not supposed to be used as evidence in the case, right? So the arguments that the attorneys make, the theory, the final closing theory that the attorneys make to the jury in closing out their case, making their final arguments, their own argument is not supposed to be used as evidence. So at this point, if you had to decide, if you were a juror, would you come back guilty? Not guilty? Would you find him guilty on the assault charges and not the harassment, or the other way around? It kind of wouldn't make sense. Would you find him guilty maybe of just harassment and not of assaults? Do you think the jury will be split? What do you think? And then I don't have much thought and analysis about today. I mean, the defense came in, they used their 3 witnesses. They used their expert witness to testify to the nature of the injuries to try to discredit the idea that even if Grace Jabbari has these injuries, they couldn't have been caused by Jonathan Majors like the prosecution is claiming. And then they bring in the talent manager to really hone in on that timeline. Like, yeah, he's also saying Jonathan Majors sound distressed, but that's not the point. The point is to show that timeline. That 10:45, then we have the text message at 11:07. Jonathan Majors makes a 911 call at 11:12, and the first responders get there within 4.5 minutes. Before that, it was like 4 minutes. And then we know Officer Swain testified 11:20 a.m. was when he remembers arriving. So the defense kept it clean. We also saw in their motion to get the judge to dismiss the case today that it's Grace's own testimony and the driver's testimony. And I think everyone has agreed that that driver was going to be the key witness since back in March when this first came out. And then to see Grace's own testimony, and then to see that Grace's own testimony is damning to the prosecution's case, I agree personally that those are the two most damning testimonies. Because Grace Jabbari's has the inconsistencies, and she was the initial accuser, and then the driver was the only potential witness. He was the only other person in the vehicle of that car. So, I think it was pretty great that the defense came in. 1, 2, 3. We're out. We have this medical expert testifying that even if you think Jonathan Majors was making physical contact with her, that could, potentially cause injuries. They didn't cause the injuries in the way that the prosecution is describing. Right? So they tied up all those loose ends really quickly today, got it moving. But that's all I've got. I'm going to be going live with, I know me and Chillmonger jumping on Pam Entertainment TV, her channel tonight. We're going to do a live stream to talk about all the evidence that was leaked to the public, day 11, predictions going into closing arguments. Just come hang out. The live chats are always really fun. And I'll put Pam's link in the description and a pinned comment. And if you want to check out my take, I did a separate video today on the Coretta Scott King recording, and then also a video on both the chase video, the injury photos, and the body cam footage. There's one body cam footage that was made public, one video on all of those three things, and another on the Coretta Scott King recording. I'll put those on the end screen somewhere here. And that's all I've got. You guys take care.